Alrighty, here we are again. I just went through a complicated process of fussing around with this because it seemed as if I wasn't getting any audio, although the streaming software claims that I am. So I did a little test stream, I went and I listened back to it, and indeed it was more or less fine. I'm having to turn the microphone up a lot, and this is the microphone I usually use for doing videos with, so I'm being captured by this mic on these headphones. Yeah, I built this for myself, and it's sort of a crazy homebrew kind of deal. But, oh, sorry about that. Thumps aside, it does work just fine. And I got my new lighting situation set up, which is a couple of big old lights here and a brighter overhead that's bluer. And I'm just going to try to do something today, because this is a live stream for the purposes of building stuff, which normally I would do on my own. I don't normally live stream this kind of thing. Yep, I know, I don't know what to do about that. That is confusing me greatly. And I do understand there is a audio-video lag. But that was happening before. And I can go to settings, I'm not sure it'll help. So yeah, I'm at least getting audio and video, even though OBS is not handling the things properly. Anyways, a fair amount of time I'll probably be doing this work while facing elsewhere, so it's almost a bit of a moot point. It's not like I'm talking to the camera like this. Instead, I'm drinking coffee and building something like this. You ever seen this before? This has been my subwoofer. It's sitting underneath my studio desk, and without this I would have nothing but a pair of Yamaha NS10s. However, this has done a pretty good job until now, because we are going to replace this on the spot with four 12-inch subwoofers. These guys, which cost me about $150 all told for the parts to build this. And that is why I am making a video, even if my timing and streaming and microphone synchronization is not working properly. Because I need to build this and I need to show people how to do this. It is useful to know about. So what are these things? These are 12-inch MCM Audio Select speakers. They're pretty good sized, although you can see that the voice coil is not actually huge. These are not like car audio expensive drivers. These are about $20 worth of driver. They're cheap little baskets here, and I'm not going to do too much to mess with those at the moment. Although I can show you some of the things that one does. For instance, be right back. Grabbing some tools. Here's some stuff that works for car audio sometimes. This is called Frost King. And you can also get stuff called Dynamat. And what this is a sort of Careful that you don't cut yourself. This generates sharp little edges, and they can cut your fingers pretty good if you slice your hand along them. But one thing you might do if you're working with speaker drivers and they're kind of clangy like this, you'll notice that also it's damped slightly if it is mounted. This is part of what speaker drivers are all about. I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do if I hadn't spent some time studying the speaker drivers. And I will point out that even when they're kind of ringy, you can put damping materials like this. This is a rubbery vinyl stuff with aluminum foil, basically thick foil. I know, right? That, as I did the caution print thing on purpose, I'll tell you why. But if you have this mounted in something like this, you'll notice that it's more damped. And I've done that with a lot of different kinds of speaker drivers. I've done that with the Yamaha NS10s I use for monitoring, because they start out as very good at absorbing extraneous vibrations and having the vibrations die away real quick, but you can always make them more so. You know, making something like NS10s more so is not a matter of making them sound worse, it's making them perform better with the advantages that they already have, because it's not the badness of them or the frequency response of them that causes them to be popular. It's the fact that they damp vibrations, their little infinite baffle, which is the same as these. I'll explain a little bit about that too. This has a speaker on each side. When they are firing, when both of the drivers are pushing out for a positive voltage, that means that they are doing equal amounts of pressure, and what that means is that if this is sealed, it serves as an infinite baffle. The infinite baffle means that if it's sealed up properly, air can't get out or in, so you can pressurize the room slightly with the drivers. Of course, with an 8-inch speaker on each side, that's not going to pressurize the room very much, but a couple of 12-inch drivers on each side, that's going to pressurize the room a lot more. You'll notice that it's not an infinite baffle yet because this is hollow. But when there is another one on the other side, and they're both pushing the same direction, this will be essentially an infinite baffle also. Now the reason for the caution tape is, if you look real carefully here, you can see that I put strips of this along the sides of this, which is called a sonotube. It's a building form sonotube, quick tube. It's for casting concrete. It will take any amount of pressure that you would pretty much want, seeing as you can fill this with concrete and let the concrete set and it won't burst. It's amazing how solid these things are. I have built enormous speakers out of this kind of stuff. The reason that I have 4 of these is not because I'm going to put a speaker in each one. I'm going to make it a double-walled arrangement, like this. There is the inner one, and that kind of goes in the inner flange of the speaker. And then the outer one, which means that any vibrations of this inner one will be slightly, there's a little bit of an airspace between them, so it'll kind of suppress more audio coming through. Now I'm going to walk you through a couple of the things that I did in order to calibrate the sizes of these, and then I'm going to start doing my soldering. because I have hopes of doing this entire thing while streaming until I'm finished and have set them up. I might want to show you one further thing though. You may wonder how I'm powering these things. And that is a question that I can answer. I'm just back here. I've got my my Channel Islands monoblocks, and that's how the speakers, the NS10s, are being powered by pretty much high-end or high-fidelity amps. They're fancy Class D based amps. But the output of the speakers to these amps goes to this funny thing. Yeah, plug these into where the speakers go up. This is a cheap subwoofer module thing. I think it's another one of those MCM ones. Gamma, I probably can't show you what they will end up sounding like because, well, I'm not sure whether I can or not, but I could give it a try. In fact, I will give it a try. All that I'll have to do is hook up the rest of this stuff and perhaps not try to run the computer audio because I'll be afraid of getting feedback or something. But I can run something through the speakers. In fact, I can even... Can you hear that? It's kind of turned up loud and the microphone's pointed the wrong way, but that's my Rhodes. So yes, I probably can, and I'll tell you what else. I'll be wanting to do this instead, so I'll get this handy. I have a cool little 80s bass. This isn't a real Steinberger, this is a Hofner. It is a Hofner Professional B2 5-string. But one of the things this means is I can unplug the Rhodes, and when I plug this in instead, so you can kind of hear that, but that is that bass through nothing but the NS10s. So there's a real limit to how much loudness I can get out of it. I fear that when I play this with the real subwoofers, it'll just blow the mic up, but I think that'll be fun, so who cares? We'll do it anyway. The point that I was going to make is that I've got this device here. It'll make a bit of noise as I screw it, and hopefully that's not going to be, or unscrew it rather. I just wanted to show you something that I did. I was talking earlier with a real good friend of mine about whether I would show people what I was doing with this, because it could possibly be dangerous to people who don't know what they're doing. This is not plugged into the wall. But as you can see, we got this huge transformer. There's the power amp right there. And here is a little circuit that this is what's making the bass happen. Full range audio is coming in through the speaker inputs here, and then it comes through here, and this stuff does equalization. What I've done with this is I've taken these three capacitors. These two are power supply capacitors, which I could tell because they were the minus was to ground. And this is on the output of the thing going to this other board. And I took the value of these capacitors and multiplied them by 10. Which was very interesting because the device gave me bass before. It was doing bass anyway. But when I multiplied the power supply capacitance by 10 on just that input board, because the power amp seems pretty big already, and the coupling capacitor by 10, it opened up the performance of it a great deal. By which I mean I could take that 5-string bass. Before, it was making perfectly fine bass sounds, but it would kind of get muddy and overly kind of thick, especially on the 5-string bass. But when I had the capacitors changed in that way, what happened was all of a sudden, even though I was only using the 8-inch drivers, it behaved as if I had a lot more bass extension than I did. And that's because the frequencies being passed through the unit were a lot more unrestricted. So that is some of the work I've done on these things. I did that before doing anything else around here. I'm going to make sure that this red and black wire don't touch each other, even though I'm also not plugging it in yet. And I'm going to just take a moment and plug it back into these amps. This is worth having a little caution about. The amps are live. So I'm going to be careful not to short the output of the amps or anything like that. It's a really great way to ruin your day. But if I do it carefully, the situation is now, this is sitting around waiting to be used. And heck, I'll even plug it in and just make damn sure that these wires aren't touching each other or anything electrical. And I plugged it in, but it didn't turn it on. So you may ask now, what's the next stage here? After all, I've got these guys and I've got, they fit concentrically. Hey, thank you, Alexandra. Sorry for blowing up your audio that way, but we're doing heavy construction with concrete building tubes. The next thing that I'm looking to do, no, I won't put all these tubes inside each other because I'm going to have 4 speakers. So the end result will wind up looking kind of like this. What I'll have is 2 tubes with 12-inch speakers on either side of them. Hey, yeah, you were not wrong. Power supply has a great deal of influence. You know, another fellow who knows that is Bob Olson, the veteran Motown engineer, has often talked about how some of the cruddy sound of modern circuits is done because people are designing them going like, oh, okay, the mathematics says that it shall have this response, and then they don't give it any power supply capacitance. I also feel that a lot of inferior modern sound comes when you've got audio going through cables and it's these incredibly tiny wispy little wires or circuit traces. I think that has more of an effect than people are willing to give it credit for. But for now, my next step is to start soldering some of these guys together. So I've got a couple of rolls of wire. This is like 16 or 18 gauge or something. It's just plain old copper wire. And I need to wire these speakers into a series parallel configuration that kind of the wires will be sneaking out the edges for the speakers go. And I'll need to mark them so that I can tell what they're doing. But then I'm going to basically have a hot wire going in to the positive of the speaker, out also along the outside to the other end of the tube where it goes into the positive of that speaker, where it comes back out and that becomes the negative. So the individual tubes will be wired in series, and then I will combine the two tubes and wire them in parallel. And these are 4 ohm drivers, so if I have the 4 ohm drivers and I wire them series parallel, 4 speakers, 2 in series and then another 2 in series, and I wire those in parallel, I get my 4 ohms back again. This is the same wiring that you have for a Marshall stack, and I will have the same cone area as a Marshall stack just underneath my studio desk. So I'm looking forward to that. I have this, it's called the Doepfer A1104 Quadrature through 0 VCO. What that means is I have a Eurorack module that does sine waves. And I got it to do bass sine waves. And I started to do bass sine waves within it and then discovered that I couldn't hear what they were because I had the 2 8-inch drivers. So I figure if I want to be doing serious extreme bass frequencies in your sort of EDM style or dub techno style, whatever, I need to be able to hear what they're doing. Otherwise it'll be useless. So, one thing at a time, I guess. And I can kind of see what you say if you're talking in the chat, because I have chat over there. I'm working on various ideas of getting my video streaming working better. Because one of the things that happens to me is if I try to do certain things with video streaming, it turns out I can't do them because the computer that I'm on isn't powerful enough to do them. So my hope is that I can fix that. Now let's see, where's my, yep. Handy dandy needle nose pliers. If you're working with things like this around a speaker driver, be careful that it doesn't stick itself to the magnet. What I've got now is it doesn't actually want to sit where I wanted it, but I have my soldering iron already ready and warmed up over here. So this will be a little DIY, and again, careful with the magnet yanking things out of your hands. This will be a little illustration of DIY techniques, and I will explain to people how this stuff is done if you've never soldered or anything like that before. As I've seen people, even fairly notable YouTubers who are real interesting experimenters, but they don't know how to do this properly. It's not that rocket science, but it's worth learning how to do right. And I'm doing these 2 rolls of wire, one on each side, because I'm going to sort of measure them out after I'm installing it into the Sonotubes. So you can't see super well from over there, but I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm wrapping this around this little solder tab here and putting a little tension on it just so that it sits in place. And that's now wrapped around where I'm soldering. What I need to do at that point is hold the soldering iron, which has a little bit of solder on the tip of it. And again, the magnet is trying to yank it out of my hands again. I'm pushing it to the metal so that the heat transfers. And then I am touching this solder not to the soldering iron, I'm touching it to the workpiece. I might touch a little bit of it to the soldering iron just to get things going. But the heart of making this work is heating up the point that I'm soldering, and then touching the solder to the hot part, you know, the wire or the solder tab that I'm trying to solder to. I'm not touching it to the soldering iron and melting it onto the piece. The thing has to be heated up so much that the solder, which can be silver or nickel, I think, or it can have lead content. I'm not sure whether this is lead content or not. It's labeled entirely in Spanish. So that might be a hint that I managed to get a hold of lead-based solder. Hard to say. It's not legal in California anymore, and I think there's a bunch of other places it's not legal in as well, but it is effective for electrical work. I have a older reel of solder like this, which is 6236-2 silver bearing regular solder, so that means it has its own lead content in it. And again, this is not legal in California and stuff. You don't want this stuff thrown into a landfill and get into somebody's water table. Again, I'll repeat one more time. I made these connections by pushing the soldering iron against the metal part that I'm doing the soldering to. It's not easy to see what that is. And then touching the solder to the part that I've heated up, not the soldering iron itself. It's very important. There's also another important part, which is once you've done that, what you do is remove the solder, remove the soldering iron. Yeah, I do listen to some EDM, although I wouldn't say as much dubstep. I'm interested in some dub techno and just general techno type stuff. There's a number of things that I like about it, but I was explaining about how when you have made the solder connection, one of the reasons I wrapped it on pretty solidly is so that it doesn't move once you've removed the soldering iron. Because if you remove the soldering iron and then this little molten puddle of solder that's holding everything together moves, it can become crystallized. It can develop problems that you don't want to be dealing with and have a bad connection. So ideally what you want to do is touch the soldering iron to the thing, melt the solder onto the part that you've heated up, because that way the rosin in there can get into where it needs to go. And then as you have done that, release the soldering iron from it so it can cool down, because it has to cool down in order to turn into a solid metal block. And then make sure that it doesn't move while it's cooling down. Yeah, that's the gist of that concept. Now the next thing I'm going to do is this technique from these guys, which I'll show you. See how this is mounted on? I don't know exactly what all of these shapes are about. Maybe this is just a weirdly shaped basket for a speaker driver. But what this is aluminum tape wrapped around this part in several layers so that it can be sturdy, and then crimped down until it will grab onto the cardboard tube. And with enough of that, and these are larger, so I'm going to put maybe some aluminum strapping tape around the outside of this part to make sure that it's held on and tightened down. It'll hold the speaker driver on there. And then once I'm finished doing that, I'll have some fiberglass and damping material to put inside these ones. Not so much on the inside of the second layer, hope is that that will work out. So I think first thing I'm going to do is let these just kind of unroll down here, hopefully without making too big of a mess. I'm going to want to label which one of these is which. That part's clear. And then I'm going to want to measure out how much of each of these wires I want. But the first thing I want to do is either seal this up or just let it be the way it is. How about I first label? There's a Sharpie, and I can mark the hot wire. It would be nicer if I had a red Sharpie. Now, by the way, notice that this is compressing the driver. It's not going to hurt it, but I'm going to take it right back off again. So, the black Sharpie can mark the hot wire. Hot wire is on the side closer to you, meaning that this becomes the hot wire. And where it's going to go in this case is out here, or actually, hang on. I'm figuring out whether I want the hot wire to be the first one that I do or not, because I must decide which is which. At any rate, the wire that goes from the one speaker to the other speaker needs to come out here and go back in on the end of the other driver. And I can have a little spare wire hanging around, so what I can do is this. And again, I'm going to double check, and sure enough, that is the hot wire. In fact, you know what I can do? I'll be back in a moment. This is the sound of my plates, as a matter of fact. So you're hearing essentially the echoing of the downstairs place. There's some big arches in here, meaning that sound echoing around in my studio room tends to go right back out again. And it'll go into over there, and it'll go over there, and it'll go around into the kitchen and stuff. But this is the positive wire. And then here is the other cable, and hey, check it out. Looks like I'm not going to be able to do what I thought that easily, because I'll need to measure the length of the wire first. No biggie. Let's assume that the other wire needs to go down here and then have a little extra. Just for laughs, I'm going to take it back up. That was too far. We'll have the other wire go about twice as far. I have essentially two 50-foot things. Yeah, at some point I'll do a room tour. So these are now cut. This is now the positive, and this is now the negative. So I have an old semi-dead battery here. That's negative, and this is positive. So if I do that, it should go up. And it does indeed go up. You can even see it like this. And it makes a big loud noise too. At least with the microphone turned up this much. It's the power of 12-inch speakers. So now that this is the positive, I keep wondering whether, I know I have an even better idea. Check this out. So red marks the positive, huh? Check this out. I will connect a little bit of red electrical tape. to the positive end. And then we don't even need to mess around with the Sharpie anymore, because it'll be color-coded as well. Again, here's my positive. It's not as long as the other one. And then I've got that. And then being a mountain man, stripping wire with my teeth, as one does. Some people do. So here is my new red wire. Here, it connects to the positive here. If I connect this to the ground of the other speaker, and then connect another wire to the positive of this speaker, and then I did the same thing with the battery, both of the speakers would go out at the same time. In fact, I may even demonstrate that. Let's do exactly that, because why not demonstrate stuff properly? My only concern at this point is that I don't have the spare wire for it. But what the hell? Take a moment to demonstrate one of these things. It's the kind of thing that somebody might want to know. So again, here's the positive of this. This is its negative, and its negative, this positive is going to the negative of this one, and then the positive of this one is just kind of bare. So if I touch this negative to this part of the battery, it's going to be a little tricky, it's going to be a little touchy. And then I touch the positive to, oh, it's being very tricky. Excuse me. That'll help. If I touch this to the positive of this speaker, both of them go up. And that's important because we're going to need all of these to go forwards at the same time, given a positive signal. I'm going to need to have 4 of these, each in the side of one of these tubes, or 2 of these tubes technically, all going forwards at the same time if you put a positive in there. It'll work, I just have to keep track of it. So again, I'm reminding myself, this long one is a negative wire, this short one is the positive wire, and it goes to the other speaker on the other side of it. Also, one final note. Reason for the caution tape? I've got this damping material on the side of the cardboard tube. It's stuck on, it has its own adhesive, but I'm going to be sealing them up basically forever. They'll never come loose again. And I was concerned that the adhesive would let go and come loose. So what I've done is taken this caution tape from when my neighbor ran over my porch and smashed it up, and wrapped it all the way around from the top all the way down to the bottom. And I've got some clear packing tape holding it on. But the idea is, unless the stuff holding the caution tape on comes loose, or maybe even if it does in certain areas, this is wrapped around in a spiral, so it can't actually let these damping parts fall off. They'll stay on there even if they're, like, one of them is upside down in the final installation. It won't matter because it's being held on by this tape which is under tension. It's not just for swank, although it is very punk. So here comes one of my big moments, which is get out the aluminum tape and start attaching this on. But before I do, I have one further point to make. If anybody is doing this and intends to try to do it in 2 pieces, if you're just doing 1 tube, there is no trouble. It won't be a problem. If you are trying to do 2 tubes inside each other, there are problems that you can run into, like this. This is actually a 10-inch tube, and this is a 12-inch tube. They're supposed to leave some space between them so that vibrations of the inner tube have more in the way before they can get out to the outside air. Because anything this large is, if it vibrates, it's a very large speaker diaphragm. Like something like this, if you could make it vibrate, it would be a big speaker area. So you want to try to minimize that. I've got one of these speakers and I'm going to put it on the floor facing down. Now if I put this on, it fits neatly on the sort of inner rim where the this basket goes. In fact, it kind of tucks in around here. It doesn't even necessarily fit all the way through. And that's intentional. It's sized for that reason. Now, if I put this on, which I will have to do with one of these drivers, I get to have both of the connections attached, and with the other one I only get to glue on, or to use the aluminum tape and tape on this outside one, because as you can see, if I have it attached on both of them attached on this bottom driver, this top one, it's inside here, I won't be able to reach this inside one to tape it on. All it's going to be doing is kind of sitting there. I might put some kind of foam or something in there to try to prevent it from rattling or whatever, because I wouldn't want that. But it's just there to sort of enclose the air within the inner area. And when I take another driver and put it on there, it fits very neatly. And when I tape this on, it'll be nice and solid. Mind you, you can sort of maybe still hear the inside rattling, but I'll figure out something on the fly as I do it. However, if I had these 2 pipes the same height, because if you remember the way these work, I cut away the inside of this one. See, different tallness, small difference. And the way I did that was I put it on the speaker like that. And then I lowered this down like that, and it stuck up over the outside one a little tiny bit. And then I took a pencil, like this, and I went around drawing a line where this outside one came up to, because I knew down at the bottom, the speaker driver here, where the big one's sitting there, the small one sitting there. Different height. I knew if I drew a line using this as a surface, I would get the amount of difference that height was. Then I took the 2 things apart. I looked at the line drawn in this one and took some tin snips, or really big shears would work too, because it's only cardboard, but it's very thick cardboard. And I cut twice the height of where it is marked. Like, the marking would be here, and then I would go that much again. And then I would put it together with the speaker on the floor, and then take the driver, put it on, and see whether it's sealed up. See whether it went all the way to this outside one or not. And for a while there it didn't, so I had to keep trimming away at it until it was the right height. I'm making a point of that because if you did not remember to do that, it would be a big mess. If you were doing this two-walled version. And the thing about Sonotubes is I just got these at Home Despot, also known as Home Depot, but I know a guy a long time ago who called it Home Despot, and I've always liked that. And they were like $12 and $14 each. The 10 inches were about $12, and then the 12 inches were about $14. So that is very cheap for enough material to make an entire subwoofer. Much less a high-performance subwoofer. Because the thing about this is if you are doing a cylindrical subwoofer, the resonances of it are terrible. It'll sound like a trash can or a drainage pipe. But with subs, you don't necessarily have to worry about that nearly as much as you have to worry about letting pressure out. And again, it's made to hold concrete, so it's not going to let air pressure out too easily. Okay, back to the grind. I'm going to actually, let me see how much of a problem this is. At 45 down. I have a fan up here. I'm going to see whether I can move a little bit of air without it being too terrible. That's not too terrible. Whatever, this could be a workshop. You could have like power tools running in here. No fair complaining. Anyways, I think the next thing I'm going to do is make some little dents in this to let the wires through. But just little tiny dents, I think, because it's not going to take much. And maybe I'll do it using the needle nose pliers. There, so there's a little nudge there. Might also try to take the scissors and snip this bit off. Again, it's cardboard. Cardboard tubes are an amazing building material. I've made giant PA speakers using cardboard tubes, believe it or not. Sort of double line source thing would take about 1600 watts. I've never given it the amount of wattage it could actually handle. I've got those upstairs. In fact, while I'm at it, bear in mind, you're going to hear the sound of my space as I run upstairs and get visual aids for something. Because I can't show you the real thing, but I can show you the visual aid. You might recognize the material that this visual aid is made from because I was doing some of my preliminary testing using paper towel rolls. You've probably seen paper towel rolls before. Here, let me put this here. As you can see, the wires come out of these little holes that I made. The holes are entirely too large. I don't need them to be this large. Check this out. You can have a paper towel roll, or you can have a funny kind of shape, or you can have a PA speaker design with spherical horn expansion. Here's how that works. You take a section of sonotube, use half of it like this, and take the other half carve it up so that it can point inwards. This spherical expansion of the tube shape is one of the most high fidelity sounding horn expansions you can have. And this linear spherical expansion is really good sonically. And then the way that it's carved in the top, you're making 3/4 of a full-on spherical horn expansion down to a single point in the end. I've built these at full size. They're about 5 feet tall. They're really difficult to move around because it turns out that the giant, super giant sonotubes are very heavy. And their cardboard is about this thick, you know, it's terrible. But they're pretty amazing speakers. At some point I'll put up the notes of how those worked, but I think for now, seeing as it's been going along for how long? Good Lord, an hour. It's been an hour and I haven't detached the first one. I knew it was going to be like this. That's why I made myself a cup of coffee. So here's my job for right now, is attach this on. So I wanted this maybe in a couple of stages. This doesn't have to be dainty. And at some point I have to figure out how to pop out the chat to see whether I can tell how many people are there or not. But it doesn't really matter because part of what I'm doing with this is I needed to be able to make a recording so that people could see how I'm doing it, because that's part of what I do here, is show you how to do these things that you might not otherwise know how to or be able to do. So I'm just wrapping this aluminum tape around. I'm putting a small amount of tension on it because there's no reason it has to have a bunch of gaps around the edge of the basket. If there is anybody watching and you want to ask me questions, I'll see it in the chat. I just can't tell whether anybody's actually in the chat until I look at something else. Oh, let's see. Okay, I think these wires are still connected where I had them. So one layer of this aluminum is not very sturdy, but I'm not going to stop at one layer. I have all of this and a second roll. So I'm going to use as much aluminum as I need to in order to hold these on securely. And the floor will be littered with this backing stuff. And then how we adapt it over to touch the cardboard is basically just by squishing it there. I'm trying to do it from both sides gently, but it's not real fussy. And I need to do another layer anyhow, so. And then having done that, it'll also go with another layer on the outside, so there's a lot of slack in here. So what I'm going to do is just run, you know, I could even measure this and figure out how roughly much I need, but I can also just eyeball it. Oop. Doesn't need to be too dainty. This is not a permanent stick. So this is more than I need, so right. Great thing about aluminum tape is that it is very easy to work with and rip and attach and stuff, and the adhesive is very nice too. I really like the adhesive on this stuff. It is IPG aluminum foil tape, but I dare say there's other kinds that are working pretty good too. The reason I'm using aluminum is because it's metal, so if I have enough of it, it'll be a fairly solid attachment. I could use something like vinyl, and that would probably work, but it's a speaker driver. It's a speaker enclosure, so I'd like it to be essentially rigid, or at least fairly rigid. Like with this particular one, let's see, you'll notice I'm making it go closer to the edge because this one doesn't have to overlap. This one just has to reach down and connect to the cardboard more securely. Because when I have the larger one, then the tape that's holding that on will overlap quite severely onto this and hold it in place real good. But this simply needs to hold it on to the inner part. This is folded up a little bit, but I'll just fold it back. So part of the reason I'm using aluminum is because it's a little more structurally sound. Part is because I like the adhesive. It's good and sticky and holds stuff on real hard. Part of it is similar to this stuff. Here, I've got it over here. I do. One of the interesting things about aluminum for speaker building is that it is a good constrained layer damping thing. Like this is a sort of gummy, rubbery, foamy stuff. But you constrain layer damp by putting something that's flexible against something that's rigid. And this is not actually going to be rigid along this aspect because it has these wrinkles. And if vibration goes through, it'll compress the wrinkles. But along this aspect, it tends to be more rigid because there aren't any wrinkles here. So compressing it would have to buckle the aluminum. Well, by all means, by all means. Remember that some of this stuff that I'm saying is for people to use for future reference. Like I would love to, for a variety of reasons, I would love to see people returning to this video when they need to make subwoofers or they're making subwoofers again or something like that. They want to make homebrew subwoofers for themselves that are actually good. There's several reasons that's good. One of them is I like helping people out, and some of these things that I do, I might even return myself to remind me how I did it. And the other thing is it actually helps me on YouTube, because what YouTube likes these days, and this is relevant to pretty much everybody who wants to put stuff on YouTube for any reason, YouTube likes things that are what they would call evergreen. And you know, they're not wrong about that. I agree with that. Evergreen means content that people would go back and look at again, that people would go back and refer to. And, you know, a lot of content on YouTube you wouldn't say was exactly evergreen, far from it. But if you can do it, it works out very well. And I know it's possible to do it and have it work very well because I've done it. I have a video on another channel that is a study on how Perlin noise is used to make Minecraft maps, and I took the trouble of, you know, Perlin noise Minecraft terrain generation is a search that would probably get you this video. And this video has so many views because people thought that it was good enough that they returned to it to check it out repeatedly. And that's the secret. Because people return to it, and see, this is held on now. It's nice and solid. Hello in there. Because people were able to return to this Minecraft terrain generation video and did so, YouTube were like, hey, that's not bad. Look at that. People keep watching this over and over again. Let's show more people this. And they started putting it in suggestions and having it as search results. And as an end result, there's this wildly overpopular YouTube video of mine on that subject. Not in our Windows, but on another channel. So the same could be true of this. If people like the idea of making a absolutely staggeringly devastating 412-inch monster subwoofer for about $200 including a cheap modular subwoofer driver. Because of course, who wouldn't want something like that? So yeah, again, that driver, the long one is the ground. This is the hot. I labeled it as such. So in order to connect it through to this speaker, which goes on the other side of it, this hot goes to this ground. They're in series. The eventual positive voltage needs to be in the positive side of both of the speakers, sort of going through in the same direction. Then, do I have my, oh, it's right behind me. There you are, you silly. Then a little Cro-Magnon wire stripping. So probably ruin your teeth. Don't do this, kids. Floss with zip cord. And again, secret of electrical wiring. This is good and hot because it's been sitting there being fully hot. If you could see the end of the soldering iron, it would be terrifying, because the end of the soldering iron gets ruined this way, but this is the heavy-duty one for big wires and stuff, so I don't need to worry about it being a nice, delicate little point. It just has to make a connection, and I'm doing it like this. And once that, also if it heats up enough, you might have it oxidize and it doesn't want to make its connection anymore. However, this one has worked. So I've left the wire on there and pushed the soldering iron down, then touch the solder to the workpiece, not the soldering iron tip itself. And then release the solder, release the soldering iron, and put enough in so that it covers the entire connection without making it an enormous blob. And then one of the reasons I'm pulling on this is so that it can cool down without moving the slightest little tiny amount. And doing that means I get a connection that is solid on both sides and is not going to come loose. Also make sure that you don't have little stray bits of wire tucked around and bridging the gap to the other part. It's just generally wise things to avoid ever doing. I'm going to get glasses that look just like this for regular wear soon enough, because I'm needing them these days. Because I'm over 50 and I'm an old man. And he says that all of my music industry friends are older than me, so yeah. Or at least so far they have been. I hope I make music industry friends that are younger than me. I'd like to think I do work that is useful to people that is younger than me, but a lot of my music industry friends are like my previous heroes from when I was a kid, so they are not younger than me. They were doing great work back when I was a teenager, half of the time. And sometimes, like I mentioned Bob Olson before, is somebody who agrees with me about power supplies and the importance thereof, are still all on the front as far as understanding these things and knowing how to make this stuff work. Now here's a point. I could just put this on and tape it up. And we go like this. But it's usually better if you have some kind of damping inside these enclosures. And there's a number of different kinds of damping. Like if you have stuff like this, this is damping for panels. This is flexible stuff with aluminum backing. And you can, oh thank you Gamma, 50 is the best age. Well, I hope so. I hope to enjoy further ones as they go. And yeah, I've got a couple of weird, the stuff that you mentioned, Gamma, on Apple Drinks, some of those were viral hits, but they're weird little songs, and for a fandom community, so you can't necessarily go by that. But this damps panels. If you had like a plate reverb or a cymbal, and you stuck this on it would just go clank and be well damped, but it's just not damping acoustical spaces. For acoustical spaces, you can do a number of different things. And again, I'm going to go in search of visual aids for showing you how that works. This might actually be something that I use for this very design. So here is my solutions for damping the inside of this. One thing you can do that people don't necessarily know about, if you put bubble wrap in a space, it will damp it. I probably can even demonstrate that. I can't really hear though because the speaker driver is so good that it's not letting you hear sound echoing through. But say if I talk in here, you can plainly hear how it's very echoey. Sounds like a pipe. You can hear that, right? I'm thinking it's coming through to the outside well enough that you can hear it. Well, check this out. If I put some of this down into here, even though it's not what you'd normally use for speaker damping, now if I talk in here, notice how it's a very different kind of thing? A lot of sound can go down into here. In fact, I can even spread this around so that it's like the shape of a tube. Most of the air space inside this is now empty. So air going down in there from the back wave of a speaker doesn't have any obstructions in the way, but still, we're not hearing the sort of pipe resonancy things because this bubble wrap is a really good, effective way of damping. Whereas if I don't have the bubble wrap on, now the microphone isn't even anywhere near this, but still, I bet you can hear the difference. Yeah, there are some cool songs, Gemma. The one called Wing Power is one that I've always quite liked. That's very good. That's another Roni musician did that. Now, I just demonstrated how bubble wrap works as damping. This is normally what we use as damping, though. This is original Fibreglass from my Yamaha NS10s. I went in and replaced them with the bubble wrap, specifically because that's better damping in certain ways. It lets you have more sonority. Springiness of the air is more intense. This stuff, if you have enough of this stuff in an enclosure, like fill it right up, the effective volume of the enclosure acts as if it's like half again as big as it is, but it also goes really dead. It goes really dull and dead and stuff. Also, this is bad for you. Be careful handling fiberglass. It's very unhealthy. You don't want to breathe it. You don't want to touch it. So I have arranged to get some of this. This is also fiberglass. It's R67. It's a silly kind of thing except for this very purpose, because if you were actually insulating walls with this is a terrible way to do it. You're buying it in these tiny little packages, and it's incredibly inefficient money-wise, like 5 square feet for some ungodly sum. But this is 48 inches long, and this is a 48-inch tube. So essentially what I can do is take this and sort of unroll it and lower it down in here, and then run off and wash my hand and not have to cut it. I don't want to cut this with scissors. It'll cause all kinds of glass fibers to go into the air and all over the place. I don't want to handle this at all. It's bad mojo. So that's why I bought this small container of it with exactly the length I need. And it's 16 inches wide. I don't believe for a second that it's really 2 inches thick. I guess it's just very heavily compressed. But it's supposedly 16 inches wide, which will go some way the way around the outside, and 48 inches long, which is about the same, you know, I bet it's not even quite 48 inches, so it should fit into here very neatly. And then I'll stuff some of this in there with it, And then I'll rush off and quickly wash my hands and hope I don't die of the plague, the fiberglass plague. Because you don't want to mess with this stuff. It's not nice. I'm going to handle it very gingerly. In fact, maybe I can handle it using the plastic it came in. Or at least part of it. It won't cause you to die instantly from touching it, but like, I'll touch it, I would never stick my face up to it and go, woof, because that would just be psychotically dangerous and bad. Instead, we just delicately try to unroll it and try to fold it a little bit without touching it. Down you go, you wicked evil stuff. Again, fold it a little bit. Go right down into here. Now I can fold it more thoroughly. And then I'll just drop this in here. I can see fibers in the light. Worrisome. Not good, kids. Be careful. A little more. And I'll leave all the rest of it for the other one. Notice I'm still not using my bare hands to touch this if I can at all avoid it. You can glue it in place. I'm not even going to try to do that. I'm going to scoot off and put this in the trash and quickly rinse my hands. I know it's not good YouTube content, but safety comes first. I'm back. So that's how we've got that. This speaker is soldered in place and ready to connect. So, and I'm just trying to remember if there's anything else I need to remember here. And there is no way in hell I'm going to try to pull that out just to do a before and after. But I can do this as long as I make sure to inhale out here and only speak into the one with the fiberglass in it briefly and while exhaling. Oh yeah, Gamma, never massage your eyes after working with fiberglass. That's the worst idea ever. Very bad mojo. So this is the sound of a sonotube that doesn't have any damping material in it. And this is the sound of a sonotube with lots of damping material in it. Big difference, as you can see. And the amount of fiberglass in there is making it act like it has an even lower resonant frequency than it does. So, there's where this goes. This is now connecting the positive of that speaker to the negative of this speaker, which means let's double check. So this is now the positive of this speaker. Before I do anything else, I'm going to get that labeled so that I don't end up getting confused. Because doing this kind of work, the first thing to worry about is getting mixed up, doing stuff wrong, and no longer knowing where you are. So, the amount of extra wire that I'm using is down to the floor and back up again. Goes up about here. here's my hot wire. Here's my label. So now I got my output wires for this one driver. And once I finish putting aluminum tape on this, I'll have the fiberglass safely sealed in here. All the electric connections will be made, and if I touch the battery to the output wires, it'll work. And in fact, if I hooked it up to the subwoofer, it would work right away. But remember how I had something to remember about this situation? I might need to do some desoldering, actually. Oops. Yeah, I think maybe I do. Can you see what I did wrong? It's not unfixable. It's not unfixable, mind you, but something that I need to consider when I do the second one. We were going to put on one of these. Hey! And you know what else? I could remove this. I can put this around, well, actually, come to think of it. Okay, yeah, no problem. I got a little mixed up. I thought maybe I needed to pass this through the width of this, but that wire is going around the outside. So check this out. There we go. So not a lot of space between these two things, but it should be satisfactory. And now I can put this over both of them. And then when I go through to the other side and put the aluminum tape on there, it'll hold that one on. But I can put the aluminum tape onto this. You see, this is why I couldn't tape it directly onto that inner tube. I mean, I could, and it would hold air, but I couldn't actually assemble it with this additional wall. And it's a really good wall. It's capable of restricting sound pressure from the enclosure, but it's very thin. It's this very thin cardboard, as is the inner wall. And there's an air gap between it and the inner wall, if all things work out. Now, what I'm thinking, however, is, since this is a fairly loose fit, since this just goes on here and there's space in here, what I want to do is take some of that vinyl-y stuff, and I want to use this as a gap filler. So here's how that's going to work. If I put a narrow strip of this stuff, this is also what it's like doing this kind of live stream, and then I'm just improvising this stuff. I've built things like these before, but I've not built it exactly like this before, so this is a bit of a new experience for everybody. And here's the aluminum part, and the sticky stuff is actually stuck to the aluminum. So this is a double-sided squishy stuff, but this side doesn't have sticky on it, and I'm not very enthusiastic about that, but we'll make do. So what I'm going to do, I'm not sure if you can see this. I'm going to peel off the aluminum. Careful with this stuff, because you can cut yourself. And trim it a little bit more. Yeah, if this works, maybe I'll do other things like this. Building stuff in here in front of a little camera and a goofy microphone. With a bit of luck, I can end up getting better microphones and stuff. This is just what I have available right now. The inner walls won't touch each other when I lay it down, because The inner one, oh, for Pete's sake. Okay, so this is me having to do this bit over again because this solder connection, this wire just broke off. So here's what it was. And the reason it broke off was because I think it was a little bit too loose. Not a problem. I'll get to that. This is one reason why you might want to assemble it and then kind of leave it where it is rather than handling it and flopping it around too much. Because when you make these solder connections and then mess around with the point where it's soldered, you can loosen it by wiggling it back and forth too much. That said, what I was beginning to show you before the piece fell off, the inner wall touches up top here. The outer wall touches around the outside here. No, it's okay. It was better then than when I had it put together and put it inside. If that came apart while it was built inside the thing, that would be very sad and it wouldn't work and I wouldn't know why. I'd have to take it all apart again. Use up a bunch of aluminum tape. The inner wall connects to here, the outer wall connects to there, so they're held kind of in place. They can't really shift relative to each other because they're mounting in different places in the speaker. And even if it did touch at one point, that would just force it to not touch in all the other points. So let's see. Yeah, no, don't worry about it. Again, better now than at some other time. But now we must attach the other wire. Should be fairly quick though. Another thing to watch out for is if you're doing Cro-Magnon wire stripping, don't bite a piece of the wire off because that will cause it to do exactly this. And I left my glasses over there. It doesn't matter, I can still basically see. But not quite well enough. So, funky old grandpa Geppetto glasses is this kind. Anyways, hey, let go. Magnet grabbing this thing. However, me touching this connection, there was already a bunch of solder on here, so it just made it easier to remelt, because when you touch solder with a hot soldering iron, it instantly melts and then conducts the heat to the rest of the connection. If you touch just bare wire with a hot soldering iron, you have a much smaller point of connection and it takes longer. So, back to the speaker minds. I kind of planned it before. What I did was I brought, this time I'm going to grab one that doesn't have stuff soldered to it. I brought one of these speakers into Home Depot and literally picked out sizes of tube, because when they sell them, they come in tubes that are stacked inside each other. What that means is if you show up when they have a whole bunch of those on the shelf, you get to micromanage the size of the tube that you get. You can get ones that are slightly larger or slightly less. They're all kind of nesting. So if people meant to do concrete casting and have all of the pilings super exactly the right diameter, it would make it more difficult for them. But for something like this, it's perfect. You could even make a giant telescope out of concentric tubes like that. I'm not sure how well it would work, but you can pick out, as I did, ones that exactly fit like this edge, this little bump on the edge of the thing, and just line up exactly with that. They're usually not perfectly cylindrical, so you kind of squeeze them until they are. And then you pick another one that's like on the outside edge of this rim. And if you pick them at those two sizes, there's going to be a middle gap. It'll be held in place to make there be a gap. It's all part of this do-it-yourselfy thing. So what I'm going to do is stick some of this on here. And maybe a little farther over, trying to fill the gap around there. The other one doesn't have such a gap to fill because the other one is aluminum taped on. But when I put this one on, then the outside one gets aluminum taped on, and then the inside one I need to do a little gap filling like this. Hence this stuff. And it comes in handy once more. It's always nice having these materials. This came from a car audio thing where I took the doors off of my car and put this stuff on the inner panel of the door, which is a kind of soundproofing. It maybe isn't perfect soundproofing, but it's fairly decent. Again, don't drag the aluminum tape along your skin, or you can cut yourself because it's a very sharp little aluminum edge. And there. Now, if all goes well, and you can also do fun things like stick some of this on the inside of the actual speaker, which works fairly well. I'm of two minds as far as doing that. I'm not sure whether I'm going to want to put tape on the speaker drivers or not. As a matter of fact, I have been toying. I don't have anything really to show you just yet, but if I rotate the camera a little bit, at one point this was my comic drawing seat of power, and this is a tiny little inkwell that I never actually ended up using as an inkwell, but I was doing comics with ink and dip pens at one point. And here I've got mechanical pencil that I drew all the comics with. It's not even on the internet any longer. It was like a different lifetime. 10, 2 different 10s, a 7 and an 038 Pilot gel pens. Those are really good. Clear water pens, Graphitone water-soluble pencil. And then these are thinned out water-soluble pencil. These are light grays, this is a medium gray, and this is a darker gray, and this is a black ink pen. And then up here we've got a sculpture shaping tool, a couple of Sharpies, X-Acto, and a prize position and a nail file. The prize position is another Sharpie, and it says New England Webcomics Weekend 2. That's a convention. I went to it a while back. They don't do those anymore. I have not used this Sharpie. Eventually it will just dry up, but that is a little picture of some of my comicking stuff, such as it was. I also drew some comics for my dad before he died, because he always liked that, and I hope to get my hands on them again and scan them and show people them at some point, because at this point I may as well. They were specifically for him, and then I sort of ran out of ideas as I had a little difficulty thinking of ideas for what I would do for a comic for Dad, because he got a little goofy and wasn't thinking super clearly. I'm not sure that I'm happy with the connection this is making. I'm going to try doing this an alternate way and hope that my wires don't break off on me again. I'm pretty sure I know why it did that. I want to attach this foam stuff to the inside of the cardboard rather than the basket of the speaker. That should help. See, what was happening with these connections in here, and I'm not going to hold it up to show you because that's how the last one broke, is this. There's solder connecting it to that little spade lug, the little solder connection there. And then the inside of the wire also has solder in it. And then there is the insulation of the wire. And that's holding that rigid, and the solder is rigid. So the only place that it can bend is literally on that point where the two connect. So essentially, it's not capable of, trying to stretch this a little bit. There we go. The only part that's able to bend is the weakest possible part, which is awkward. But yeah, at some point I'll get the comic thing done. I've had the desire to do that. That feels a little more solid. So the final test, the final countdown. And if this works, I can tape it up. Seems to work. So now my next job is, one, to put the aluminum tape on this one so that it's held on nice and strong, possibly with additional strapping tape around the outside edge just to make it be held on more tight. Then I lift the whole thing up and flip it over without letting the bottom drop out of it, because this is one speaker attached to the inner tube and one speaker attached to the outer tube. It's like a giant accordion of hell, and you don't necessarily want it to be flopping around like that. If nothing else, it might rip the wires loose, and that would be terrible now. So what we're going to do is this final part of, and with this I can just use the outside of the sonotube, because it's very little different from this edge. Yeah, I mean, one of the things about comics is that you have to be able to spend money living in order to do one, because it's very unlikely to, much like almost everything else these days, it's almost impossible to make money doing any of these things because there's so many people wanting to do that. And that's kind of annoying, but if you treat it with respect and understand that's how things work, then it's possible to sort of work around it. And when I say treat it with respect, you don't go around behaving like, oh, are you a good cartoonist? Well, if you were a good cartoonist, you could make a living. It's like, no, it's like being an actor or something. Like that poor guy who was in the Cosby Show, I think, and then was working in Golden Corral or something like that, and people are like, oh, how the mighty have fallen. It's like, yeah, hello, normal actor. You know, hello, somebody in the real world. You have to have respect. You know, maybe the fellow doing the Golden Corral job, you know, wanted to put children through college or something like that, or wanted to live comfortably in a normal kind of way. So many of these things that we do, glamour profession kind of stuff, it does not offer financial return. You have to be able to pay to do it. And cartooning is very much something like that. You know, so, yeah, well, the neat thing is that if you can write, if you can comic, if you can like build plugins or whatever, there will be people who read. It's just that this is it's almost like getting towards that Star Trek future thing. I don't like to beat political crap into the ground when it's my plug-in business, and I like to love all of the people who are getting something out of the stuff that I do. But your ideal Star Trek future kind of thing is where we don't need to be concerned about making money because our basic things are just made through replicators and whatever, and they're not that challenging to do. And that's how things are now, is if you cared about it, this stuff is not that challenging to do. And then people will still compete, people will still strive. What people will strive for is recognition. they will strive for attention. And there's nothing so wrong about that. And they will strive for attention through all these various ways. And I believe this looks like this side of the speaker is well and truly put together. Except for I do want to run strapping tape around the outside. So yeah, that has a lot to do with why I do what I do. I'm trying to give people tools to make the stuff that they want to make, up to and including, for instance, subwoofers, whether or not they have the financial resources to spend on acquiring the proper versions of whatever. I think it's a bit of a crock, this idea that you should be able to have the financial reward, because these days, I mean, especially as far as plugins are concerned, what I see is that the people who are making the big financial rewards are the ones that are exploiting their customers the worst, or treating their customers the worst. And there seems like a very direct correlation between whether you're willing to hose your people in order to get personal advantage for yourself, or treat them really well and forego special advantage for yourself. And the shape of that scenario is that it compels you to hose your own people in order to get money, in order to continue to compete and look like you're a big deal. And I just fight that, which is why I do the Patreon thing. Now here, we have a complete speaker, which if I let go on this end, the bottom tube will slide out and we'll be sad. So we're not going to do that. Instead, we're flopping it over like this and putting on that vital other layer. And be sure not to yank on these, because one of these just goes from one end to the other. It doesn't have a lot of slack in here. And again, that's loose, but not for long. And again, I think every step of the way, I'm going to continue to test it for speakertude. Speakertude test engage. Successful. Boy, it's 8 o'clock already. Maybe the second speaker will go faster. If it doesn't, I'll have been doing this for like 3 hours by the time I'm done. But it will be worth it. It'll be gloriously worth it. I do still write novels and books, however they're fandom books, and so not everybody might be interested in them. However, within the context of doing these fandom books that are heavily colored by the fact that I don't have time or opportunity to live like a normal human being, so I live this sort of monastic celibate existence, I've written 9 since 2012. And that's all I got to say about that. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to doing so many things, though. I mean, the disadvantage of this is that, it takes a toll on you. I think I am more worn out than most people would normally be at the age of 50. So I wonder, how well my health is going to hold up. And that's a question that I can't actually find out except for just waiting and seeing how it all worked. Because there is an advantage to doing stuff that you really care about and believe in. I think there are certain kinds of stress-related ailments having to do with doing kinds of work that you basically just know this is worthless. I've read some articles about, I think there were some articles coming out of the UK where people were interviewing people who lived in London, and worked B asterisk 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 T jobs. Because they basically were white collar, they were paid really well, but what they did was they came in and they sat in meetings. And they sat in some more meetings. And then they like filed some papers that nobody was going to read, and then they went home. Yeah. Well, I work to remain reasonably healthy about as much as I work on anything else. Like, I do exercises. Here, check this out. I do some weightlifting. So that's a 40-pound weight. And I do stuff like that. And I do these weightliftings like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when I can. And I try to always can. I don't like blowing that kind of thing off because you stop it and then you'll never start again. But it's a way of kind of keeping relatively fit. And what is otherwise a pretty inherently unfit existence. Here we are rolling the tape over the edge here. The tape is connecting more to literally the edge of the driver, but I'm just folding it over because it'll help. There, and again. Got that on there. And trying to stretch out a good long piece of strapping tape to just stretch around this and make sure that it doesn't come loose ever. I like this stuff too because it's a really convenient way of building fiberglass tension elements into your design. You really can't rip this stuff apart with your bare hands, no matter who you are. So what you do is stretch it around like this. And that's not going anywhere. Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, when I eat, Jen was asking, do you only eat rice or do you almost only eat rice? I do keep a bunch of rice around, but I also like stir-frying chicken with stuff. Like one of the things I started doing recently, because I like stir-frying chicken, but then you always want to put a bunch of sauce in there, and sauce is almost all like sugar and salt and everything nasty. I got some curry powder, which I have in fairly large quantities. So I'll make my rice, and then I'll put curry powder and coconut oil, perhaps, into a frying pan. Don't mind me just pointing this at you. This won't hurt a bit. And the flavor experience is like this. Let's see how much we... How's that for a subwoofer? So we have 1 of 2 completed. This will go down under here. In fact, this might be a fine time to put it in. Let's see. What I'll do is I'll thread this under here and then scooch this back. I have already measured to make sure that it does fit underneath the studio desk. This will go as far back as I can get it. pretty far back. And then at its desired position, which you can't see anymore, the Thunder, yeah, I know, early Patreon was rough. Goes like this. Let's see here, there still rocks the meters. That's a woofer. Remember, those battery things don't usually give you a sense of the deep bass either. So I am scooching back here, grabbing my wires. There's one, here's the other. I've got a really good wire extension here. Excuse me. I'm probably going to want to address these cables somehow. But for now, we'll just angle them like this. Now I could wire this up to the subwoofer now, but I'm not going to do that because I want to do the other one. And it took me an hour and 47 minutes to do the first one, so I want to do the other one. With luck, it will work a little bit faster. The socks are coming loose. And if I'm smart, I can put it together and still have it be okay, rather than try to do it faster and screw it all up. Don't want that. Oh, and I should be drinking this coffee that I still have, seeing as it's 8 at night by now. And I get up in the morning and post a plugin, a new plugin. Not an old ported plugin, but a brand spanking new plugin that I have not tried before. Gulp. So that is one subwoofer built. Now to do number two. I'll have this be the one that's taped to the woofer because this has the flatter edge that I didn't cut up with scissors, so it'll make a better connection. I'll get these two things handy. I'll drag my extra backing for the aluminum tape and just stuff it in here for now. Wire connecting handy. I'm going to try to do the sequence of events exactly the same way as I did the previous time, only without the experimenting parts. And hopefully it'll go faster, even a lot faster, hard to say. But the idea is I'll do it the same way so that I'll get the same output, the same results. And one of those, the subwoofer thing that I've got under there is so far under there that you can hardly see it at this point. Up, and where did my glasses go? I'm needing to use those to be able to see these electrical connections. I'm also pouring with sweat, but I don't necessarily want to crank the overhead fan up even more because it'll only make a bunch of noise in the recording. And at the moment I'm simul streaming over to Twitch, so I can't take off my shirt. They would be mad. Too much beefcake. Too much 50-year-old beefcake. Whoop whoop. It's only fair though, I mean, I do understand how that works. Ooh, new face. New ID. So again, touching this to the metal, not touching the solder to the iron directly, but instead trying to heat up the metal to the point where solder melts untouched to the workpiece. And this is also causing the same problem that caused it to break before. Solder went into the wire underneath the insulation, causing that part of it to be more brittle. It's not entirely a bad thing. It is a darn good connection, but that's not a flexible join at all. Okay. The wires. Thank you for building them, and you're quite welcome. Well, thank you for enjoying them. You know, I always did build the plugins, and it was a bit of a strain all the time that I needed to, like, keep up with the sales of, I don't know, Waves and Slate and so on. No, this is a stray piece of wire and no mistake. Oh, there we go. I found where it left off. It was always a challenge trying to keep up with the raw sales of these businesses that were just bombarding everybody with, you know, direct advertising, street teams, all this kind of stuff. And I held my own fairly well, but after going to the Patreon, I swear I'm a lot happier because I'm able to take the attitude I would want to take about all of this, which is giving people the stuff that they need. I'm trying to untwist this wire. Actually, I think I have twisted the wire rather than untwisting it. Now let's do the opposite move. Arm a clever pun. Oh. Or maybe I'll just get ready to cut it and not even worry about that part. So, little red part that goes along to the red wire. Flipping this up so that these places don't pivot or move too much, because that would be bad. The ground wire is this one that didn't get all tangled up. The red wire is this one that did. So, again, red wire is here. Red wire will go over to the next speaker, so it will go down to roughly floor level and then a little farther. And red wire is here. And red wire is labeled. And so it gets wired to the ground connection of the next speaker because they're wired in series. Series means that they keep going end to end, and if positive is on one side of the wiring, it continues to be on that side of each speaker in the chain, as if it was electricity flowing through from one side to the other, and it goes through the same direction for each one. And then this is the ground connection. So this is the one that goes from here to the bottom and then right back up to the top again. I probably don't need this much extra wire, but who knows, maybe these speakers will end up sitting somewhere else one day. And in that case, I might want the additional connection. And the Cro-Magnon wire stripping. There's the end. There's the end of this one. Alright. Now I can begin. And if you only just came in, this is the second of 2 speaker enclosures, each of which contain 2 12-inch woofers. So the total subwoofer that I'm building is a 4 12-inch subwoofer that sits under my desk. And it replaces a 2... oh, you know, here's something that I forgot to do, but maybe it's not important. I messed with the surface of this so that there was a space for the wires to go through. That could be the space for the wires to go through. Great thing about working with cardboard tubes as a building material, it's very difficult to work. Oh goodness, you need such terrible tools like your bare hands. This bends over here, and if I assemble this properly, it should not move those connections any further. Time to get busy with this stuff again. Aluminum tape. Obviously, it doesn't have to be real particular as far as where the location is. I am pleased with the way these came together. Oh, here's the danger zone. This tried to curl itself up. If this does it too much, then it sticks itself to itself and is difficult to unstick. And I'm seeing a little bit of that, but not so much that I can't handle it. See, that's still essentially usable. That is kind of runkled. Runkled, that's a good word. A good invented word. But it should still work. Yeah, I never can tell who might be watching. I have friends who are on Twitch or watching YouTube sometimes. They don't necessarily have the ability to hang out all the time, but they could swing by and just be hanging out with the rest of you, watching me do this stuff. Because they kind of know me too well. They're like, oh, well, our friend is too busy doing this and is not going to be able to hang out and talk. That's one of the things is, was it earlier, Jenma, so one of the people in the chat at the moment, talking about, oh, the number of many things that you make and stuff. Well, there's sacrifices. It's possible to do that. One of the reasons I ended up doing all of that is because I have a pretty hefty dose of autism and do not have lots of personal friends hanging around a lot. I have them. They're very important, but they're often like internet people or other recluses and stuff. And that's cool, but there were many years where I didn't have friends either, and all I had was these projects and things. I like it better now that I have, you know, on the one hand, a user base out there who can use what I do, who can use what I make. And then I've got some friends that I see some of the time. I've got a bit of a private life, such as it is. And I'm surviving pretty good. Can't really complain. I can't complain, but sometimes I still do, as Joe Walsh would say. I try to attach these in slightly different places so that the overlap hits in a different place each time. Remembering that this is the one taped to the inside wall, so it is also going to get another layer of tape on in the final analysis after the last stuff has been put in place. So yeah, for those who have just wandered in or something like that, I'm building giant subwoofers out of building tubes and 12-inch woofers you can get from like Newark or MCM Electronics is what they're actually supposed to be. This one specifically is MCM model number 55-1255. And it claims to be an 8-ohm speaker, although I thought these were 5s. Or I mean 4s. Go figure. That's a little confusing. I suppose it's just a little perplexing, or maybe it's a little mislabeled. Or maybe I'm just confused or don't know what I'm building. But the bottom line is I am building a 4-driver subwoofer built in these giant 4-foot by 12-inch tubes. It's going to be a double wall design. This is the inner wall. And they're wired series parallel. Like the ones in any given tube, 2 of them are wired in series, and then if I wire those in parallel, I get back to what the original driver is. And whether that is 4 ohms or 8 ohms isn't that big of a deal, because it'll still end up being pretty workable, I think. Hope so. If I end up having to boost the subwoofer, that'll be a bit of a pain in the butt. Although bear in mind, the subwoofer that's driving these things is like worth about 40 bucks anyway. And the secret to that is there is no replacement for cone area. So if you're building a giant monster subwoofer, you could use a lot of wattage in a tiny little container and a very expensive high-powered driver. You have like a $300 10-inch woofer that has 2 inches of motion range or whatever, and you've got it in this little box and you have enormous wattage driving it. And that is one way you can do it, but you can also use large enclosures and huge amounts of cone area, which is really a more effective way, I think. It'll just take up a lot of your room, but you know. These are the sacrifices that we make. Okay, so I'm going to flip this guy over. But we are also going to test and make sure that it still makes a noise. I can do that without even lifting it, but I think maybe I'll lift it anyway. There's enough room for it to fit, and see, here's another thing about enclosure size. A big enclosure is a big old tube like this. You can hear that it is making an enormous thump through our little microphone over there. However, as I get it closer to the ground, the bottom of the thing against the carpet means there's a tiny little enclosure on the other side of the speaker. And what that means is there's no room for the speaker to move, and so it's more of a high frequency click rather than the huge thump that it was. Okay, let's shoot some of these guys over a little bit, because I have more soldering to do. This is the ground wire. This is the plus wire that will be wired to the ground of the second speaker since they're both pushing the same direction. If they were miswired and pushing opposite directions, it would still make a sound, but it would defeat the purpose of pressurizing this tube. Instead, you'd have a speaker in one end of the tube firing one direction, and then the other speaker firing the opposite direction and kind of emptying out the tube as fast as the first one filled it. So you wouldn't generate the same amount of sound pressure, especially at really low frequencies. Sound pressure would kind of just go away. And again, this is the other speaker, so, oh, and again, I need my, they're just reading glasses for now, but I need to get real ones. Thanks to the Patreon, I can afford to get real ones at this point. Yay. I'm going to splurge. I'm going to get 2 sets of real ones, one for driving and one for reading, so I don't have to use these cheesy drugstore reading glasses, which are probably not as good as they should be. That's not why I've missed a tooth in here. That wasn't about stripping wires, I promise. The dark tales of Chris from Air Windows. So, I am now ready to do the final soldering for this whole project if all goes well. Which I hope it does. We got the ground wire, which is the hot of the previous one. And remember, every single time I do this, I will explain. You touch the soldering iron to the thing that you're trying to solder to get the metal of it hot. Once the metal is hot, you touch the solder to the metal of the thing you're soldering, not the soldering iron itself. You do not melt stuff with the soldering iron and drip it onto the work. That's not how it works. There's rosin in here. It needs to be able to go directly onto the work surface. And then it has to stay perfectly motionless while you are releasing the heat. Otherwise, there's a risk of getting a cold solder joint or something wrong with the solder joint. Okay, now this isn't going to take much handling. So again, we're just about done. One thing I can do while I've got this here is the other half of that sound damping experiment by putting damping materials inside here. And that's really important. So, let's see. First thing I'm going to put is some of this, and I'm also going to put some of this. I talked about this about an hour ago when I was doing the previous one. Dangerous, bad stuff, don't touch it. Dark Tales from... Oh, you have no idea. Oh, you have no idea. I'll make that a Patreon goal. If you really want to hear the dark tales, believe me, you can hear tales you would not even believe. But it'll cost you. Because it's not necessarily to my advantage to be telling all the dark tales. You get to be 50 years old, you get to live a little. So, there's that. Anyways, fiberglass, super bad for you. Don't breathe it, don't touch it, don't do anything with it. So what I'm going to do is sort of undo this down here. I'm being careful with my feet because what I'm trying to avoid doing is like tripping over a wire and yanking a solder connection loose. That'd be terrible. And it's going to be the same deal as before, which is I'll handle the stuff and put it down into here and then rush off and wash my hands quick, because this is no joke. So I'll delicately get this loose like this and then start unfolding it like this and try to get it down into here as quickly as I can. That rested against my forearm, which I did not appreciate. I want to hide this in here as soon as possible. So bad for you, it's bad stuff. Messy. And the remainder of what came out of originally Yamaha NS10. So this is legitimate NS10 fiberglass stuffing, I think, unless it's a hot rodding material fiberglass stuffing. I think they had fiberglass in original NS10s. I'm not actually sure. Okay, let's let it hear that breathing. This nasty stuff in the trash barrel and wash off. I'm all washing my arms off too, because those bits of fiber could get anywhere, and anywhere they go, it's not good. Alright, back in a moment. Okay, and again, being AFK is not compelling YouTube content, but safety first. Well, I think this is sagged down a little bit too low though, so I will raise it a little bit. Put it back. All right, next thing is well, first of all, let me unplug this while I can, while I'm thinking of it. I'm going to make a couple of little dents in here for the wires to come through. They don't have to be very big. It's pink so that you can know it wants to kill you. It's pink because that's what Owens Corning has always colored it. I don't know why. And here's what I didn't remember the previous time. I'm handling these solder connections here gingerly because they could snap and I don't want them to. I could put the speaker directly on, but what I want to do is put this on and then put the speaker on over that. So this goes up. This goes over and I have my double wall thing going on. In fact, I can probably lean this up and show you. This is roughly the size of relative wall thickness. So if you put the speaker in there, there's pretty much going to be an air gap. the more well it lines up to the parts of the speaker, the better the air gap it will be. But there will be an air gap. I'll scooch that over a little bit. I do not feeling like it's a scratchy throat after having just handled fiberglass. I want to get this cover on here and then not deal with the stuff again. Goodbye, fiberglass. Except for I can't quite do that, can I? Because I can test it for fit. And that's a good fit. But if you remember the last time, I'm going to want to put this stuff in there to sort of gasket the inner one, since I can't tape up the inner one directly. So that needs to happen. So I've looped this over in hopes of not bending the angle of the wire, and yanking it like I just did is bad too, but I think it has survived that. This one is now the output wire. And I learned that roughly 3 bits of this will go around the inside of this inner cardboard tube. So I'm going to try to do that in one go. Cutting this into thirds. And just eyeballing it. Then removing the aluminum from the other side of it because it doesn't serve a purpose here. Oh, stay. Whoa. It's stuff getting away from me every which way. I'm so tantalizingly close to being able to seal up this horrible fiberglass and not worry about it again. But, and boom. Serving as a gasket around the inside edge. One thing that you might find interesting is that this inside edge of the inside of all of these sonotubes is a weird sort of waxy-like substance. The adhesive seems to stick onto it pretty well. It's smoother than just the raw surface of cardboard. But a little thought will explain why that's there. These are for casting concrete tubes. So as a result, it has to not leak or let water through to the cardboard, because cardboard, turns out, is incredibly strong, but wet cardboard isn't very strong at all. So the strange waxy texture of the inside of the sonotube is very much about preventing water of any kind from getting through. Like you could use it to line a well and it would probably last for a while. Don't put my hand in the fiberglass madness, no. You know, we joke about it, but that is actually pretty serious. You don't want to mess with that stuff. If I was really being responsible, which I'm not being wholly responsible, but I'm a crazy DIYer, and, you know, if you want to, just so as you know, if you want to do this really properly, get a frickin' respirator. Get a mask for working with anything like fiberglass. If you were doing insulation of a house, you would have a mask. The reason that I bought the tiny little fiberglass things was so I did not have to cut or shape them in any way. You saw me, I just sort of unrolled them and forced them down the tube as effectively as I could. If I was doing this over and over again, if I was building these for people on a regular basis, I would be using a mask. Honestly, I should have been using a mask. That's just maybe. That's me being kind of foolish. Derpy, as some of my worlds say. So I have now constructed a gasket out of this material, which is a rubbery, vinyl-y kind of stuff, and I am very close to finishing up this whole project. In only 2:21 is 2 hours and 21 minutes, which is not so bad. So I'm going to run a little more wire out here. This is the hot. I'm going to double check on that and make sure that I know what I'm doing. Yep, see, because it goes to the little red wire. The one that has red on the end is going to the ground of this connection. It's a fairly tight thing. I'm also not entirely happy about how tight this wire is, but it will be okay. There's just enough play in here that I'm not really worried about it, but I needed to leave a little more space here. If this started being stretched to the point of making a musical note, that would not be good structurally for the whole thing. But it will do for now. I'm contemplating making holes for the... yeah, let's do that. Little tiny spots for the wires to go. Press them down a little bit. There, and there's a little play. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to take this one, which is the hot wire. If plus connects to this, then the speakers point out. And I'm going to grab my connection here so that this goes out, and my red wire instantly, without doing anything else. I'm immediately going to this so that I don't forget or get it wrong somehow. And red goes to hot wire. This is the ground wire, and it's reasonably solid. Cro-Magnon strip of the other wire. And these should work, and the plus will make the speakers go out. So, yup. All right, let's seal this puppy up. We're done. I think there's a certain degree of like wind thunder going into that poor little mic. I have that headset, and the microphone there actually has a little dead cat windsock on it. The little white fluff is acrylic fake fur, and that's what a dead cat pop filter or a wind suppression device is. A Zeppelin is the same thing, of like fake fur or whatever, but in a little empty screen tube or something, maybe this big, with sealed off ends. You have this sort of screen thing, you have your microphone in the inside of it, and then you have fake fur on the outside of that, and that kind of stuff is really resilient to wind noise. What I've got in there at the moment is a bit of a dead cat windsock, but it's not nearly as resilient to wind noise when I have an overhead ceiling fan going. Also, Remember an interesting little detail about putting together the previous one? I can put this on, but then if I tried to lift it up, it would just yank on this poor tight thing and screw it up, because this speaker is getting connected to the outside tube, the other speaker is connected to the inside tube until I go and put another layer of tape over that. So I'm going to be sure not to just like grab this and go yank, because it would lead to grief and tears, and it would be very sad. We don't want that. We want a glorious, successful, exciting result, which I'm thinking is going to happen. I think it's going to become pretty exciting as soon as I take the bass there and play stuff through those NS10s right there, and then hook up the subwoofer and play the bass through that and the NS10s. If I'm not mistaken, that's going to be pretty amusing. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I'm trying to remember whether I did 2 layers of aluminum tape on the bottom side after having done 2 layers of aluminum tape on this side of the previous one. Well, if I didn't, I can do it that way. It's not that the aluminum tape is holding air in, because sort of the structure of the cardboard is doing that. It's that the more aluminum tape I have on here, the more physical strength it has for getting vibrated loose or coming off in some kind of way. I don't have all that much overlap on this guy, but then I think I mentioned before, the primary connection here is the tape to the outside edge that it's being kind of stressed. When I'm squishing this top part flat, what it's doing is it's folding the tape tightly against itself and causing a sort of curve. And that curve is also going to furnish some strength against having it be pulled off. It'll be very difficult to pull this thing apart or have the vibrations of the speakers vibrated apart. And then finally, the fiberglass strapping tape to just sort of secure it even more. Because you can only stretch the aluminum tape so hard, but this stuff you can stretch really hard. It's also serving as a strain relief for these wires. Well, that one I'm not going to have to worry about being a strain relief. That one is its own little strain relief. I'm pulling pretty hard on the strapping tape doing this. Got it so folded over a little bit there. Another brief little continuity test, every little step. Just because if anything went wrong and I had to take it all apart, it would be a big pain to do. In 2007, I started Air Windows as a mastering studio. You never can tell how things will work. So let's see. Flip this fellow over. There, that shouldn't have done anything untoward. Now I rearrange this just a little bit. Now, this should make a really good internal wall, because if this is kept pretty cylindrical around the outside edge, it's almost impossible for the inside tube to touch it at any point. And one more thingy of, well, two more thingies of aluminum tape, one more thingy of electrical tape, or electrical strapping tape. So many different kinds of tape. Would you have known that it was possible to build speakers with tape and cardboard and have them be awesome? Well, that is a very cool thing, really. What I'd like to do is get experimental with other types of things. Like, there is a kind of high-end speaker being made that is like 4 bare drivers pointing the opposite direction of you. And then on the other side there is a single horn tweeter. That was going to be interesting. Squish these down a little bit and hold it right across. And again, me stretching this tape onto the speaker driver causes it to make a nice physical connection there, but aluminum tape will only survive so much stretching, because if it rips at any point, it's basically done. Yeah, all the tapes. Tape dither. I had to revise my release of Ditherbox because it turned out that I had included like not just another dither, and I was like, yay, I've included everything, and I'd forgotten all of the TPDF variations, and I'd forgotten tape dither. No dither doesn't count because no dither is like a flanger for dither. I decided I didn't need to include it because you needed to have an extra control for just only it. Then it'd be more fun to like do a version of no dither that had an LFO built into it. And my second thing of aluminum tape. Now this is getting good and solid. It gets to the point where you're not really going to break it by picking it up or moving it around or anything, because all of the bits are sort of taped on and hooked in and physically solid. I mean, you could still damage it by flooding it, for instance. If you flooded it, then the cardboard would basically collapse, and that would be bad. So I'm going to try to avoid doing that. Come on, you. There we go. Yeah, well, Paul Dither is Paul Frindle, and he has said, oh, that's not really me. That's not really mine. I just decided to use it for Sony Oxford. Paul Frindle is the nicest guy. But I called it Paul Dither because I just wanted to honor him or shout him out in some kind of way. Not that I'm all that terribly important or anything, but I like knowing people like that. He is this very nice fellow in England. I'd love to meet him someday. And he was doing the software coding for Sony Oxford. Yeah, well, no, Paul Dither doesn't actually use a node in the same way. Not quite. Paul Dither is taking a random noise and adding it, and then subtracting it the very next sample. It is a one-pole random noise dither, but the secret to that is that you don't actually have to use a separate random noise, you just have to use randomness. So you can use a random noise and then immediately subtract it again, and it counts as TPDF. It's random enough to work for that. So it is a very good dither as these things go. As far as like technically well behaved uncontroversial TPDF style dither. Paul dither is really quite good. I tried to top it by doing double Paul dither, and I'm not at all sure that that was necessarily an improvement. I think it really is kind of optimal in some ways. However, I still like the Not Just Another dither. That one's mine. And it may not be as simple, but it's an idea that nobody else used. Nobody else is doing Benford realness measurements, much less trying to use them as a dither. It is one of those crazy Chris ideas, and I'm just glad that it worked. Those are always my favorites. When something just occurs to you and you're like, huh, why didn't I try this? What could possibly go wrong? And you try it, and it's actually amazing, and you go, huh, boy, I didn't work very hard to make that. It gives you a sort of the spiritual experience of not struggling too hard to take credit for the stuff that you do. There is a lady, Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote that book, Eat, Pray, Love, a long time ago, and then spent a lot of time being really anxious because she wasn't sure whether she could ever top that book. Which in technical terms, she's not going to top that book. That was a publishing phenomenon, and those things don't get repeated. But she got all hung up about it anyhow, and then ended up coming across with this interesting sort of spirituality based on the Greek idea of the genius as a kind of inspirational spirit. So, let me see what I can... People all there staring at my butt as I try to figure this out. Well, come to think of it, even before running the wires, let me do that final test with the battery. Yep, that lives. And now, I'm going to try to make a sort of loop of this and then throw it through to the other side. Okay. There it is. There you are. Alrighty. Okay, so now we got this set, dangling it over my and this set, which is longer. So next I'm going to do this sort of methodical thing of coming around to the front. I can actually sit in a chair now, although I will have to put something to prop those speakers back where they're supposed to be. You've been the only one talking to me, Gamma, so don't worry about spamming the chat. I wouldn't call it spamming the chat when you're the only one here talking to me. When I'm doing this, I like wires that are polite and not too difficult to strip, although I just screwed that one up a little bit. Excuse me. I actually bit pieces of copper out of it. Arr. Cro-Magnon electronics. Let's see what these different things are like. Here is one of the speakers. Here is another one of the speakers. Here is what we're going to be doing momentarily, which is wiring them in parallel. Like this. Grounds together. I'm getting very close to doing that, hooking up the bass. You shall see the difference between the two. Or I certainly hope we will, otherwise I'll have more work to do and it probably can't all be tonight. But for now, here is each of those things in parallel, series parallel. 4 speakers. That seems to have worked. So, I got some little twist wire connectors in here. And I have my come on back here, yo. Oh, am I going to have to disconnect them? I am. It's okay, I'll connect them again. They were going on 2 sides of a thing here that holds my camera up. So let's see. I've got the subwoofer output. Honestly, I should be stripping that again, but I'll worry about that later. And the twisty wire connector. And I have the positives and the red wire, which is the plus. So I'm going to be dressing those cables, but here's the moment of truth, folks, or folk, because I think it's just you. Oh, you know, I do play City Skylines. I'm very hesitant about doing gaming on the Air Windows YouTube channel, though. So it's possible I can do that on that Applejinks one. It's just that it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to configure OBS. You switch it over each time, and it requires fussing. Anyways, this is NS10s only. Now, we hit the on switch and see if everything explodes. And having hit the on switch, there we go. That is 4 12-inch subwoofers. And again, a little reference. I'll turn it off. That was the power amp going away. This is without the subwoofer. adjustment. No, there's not much of an adjustment I can even make other than dialing it back. Whoop, on with the subwoofer. And with the 412 subwoofer. It's a low B, SE. Well, normally you would be listening to the direct output off of the board, but yeah, so the mic is not really meant to do that, and the mic is pointed away from the speakers anyway, but excuse me. And the little Rhodes with the subwoofer. Alrighty, so that is a project completed. Bring the band over behind me, boys. So that is a project that is completed, and I hope if you've been watching this, you enjoy. Mic over behind me too. That is a project that's completed, and if you've been watching this, I hope you've been enjoying it. This has been 2 hours and 48 minutes and 27 seconds of building giant subwoofers, kind of like this. Out of cheap and readily available drivers, taped onto the end of aluminum cardboard tubes, using aluminum tape, and the entire project is very cheap and easy to do, but the results can put out some surprisingly intense deep bass, and that is pretty much what I needed to be doing. Oh no, I have music to listen to, I just can't play it on stream. There's music that I listen to, like there's stuff I found on YouTube that is great fun. There is a guy who goes by Xeed, and he does these YouTube videos and mixes of other people's music called Lost in Dub Techno, and Circles and Spheres podcast. Again, Xeed, guy goes by Xeed, and he likes putting together stuff with extremely, extremely deep bass. So that's the first thing I'm going to listen to off of this. Oh, well, Alien Kittens doesn't have as deep bass as you think it does. I'm thinking more like 30, 40 hertz bass. I'm thinking some really stupidly low frequencies. Because here's the thing. This little piece here, the quadrature through 0 VCO, maybe I'll demonstrate it. On with all the magics. Whatever comes through the speakers is what we're going to be doing here. And what I need to do now is hook something up. So let's just say we're output number 14, which is previous. Well, no, actually this is handy. I don't even need to do a spare wire. I'm not sure how loud this is going to be. Possibly not very loud at all, huh? I do have 14, right? Yep, that's the one. Okay, that's funny. For some reason it's just fading away. You hear that? Now I should be able to bring this up in level. I'm not really sure why it was fading out, but I'm not using, I don't have anything on the 1 volt per octave, that's the thing. So this is a sine wave. And it's being a little fussy with me level-wise. I'm not sure why that is. Let's try it in a different channel. That, or maybe it's just the frequency it's at, I don't know. Fine, we'll put you back to the original channel. I might not be able to hear it just because it's a sine. Sines are fugitive, they come and go very easily. But, here we go. Anyway, that's the basic idea. It's a sine bass, and the sine bass goes down very deep indeed. Anywho, we'll shut this off. Spark. And that brings us to almost the 3-hour mark, so I hope you've had fun. I'm going to go and sleep. This is past my bedtime by just a little bit. And I'll see you tomorrow when I post a special plugin, a new plugin that I have. It's called Unbox, and it's trying a new kind of experiment. I've got a interesting thing going on with that. But the hardware has been tested now. Also, in most of my recordings, I'm not going to have weird sync issues between audio and video, but that's OBS doing something, and I needed to get this work done, sync be damned. So I did most of my talking off camera. Anyways, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.